Hey Gayatri, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's such a joy and pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So I'm gonna start by asking a very simple question. Where are you from and where do you live?
Well, do you want the short answer or the long answer? Because literally, I wrote a book to answer those questions. Currently, I live on the sacred lands of the Muskogee Creek people. That's the area known as Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a Punjabi Desi diasporic person who grew up all over the world. Most specifically, I was born in Tanzania, and my mother, my brother, all my immediate biological family live in the capital city of Botswana, known as Gaborone.
People on Instagram know you as Desi Book Aunty. I'm
Hanji.
curious, how did you settle on that name?
So I used to joke about being a book auntie. After I left academia, I used to be a college level professor and I used to teach children's literature courses. I used to teach teachers and I used to take students on study abroad excursions. So when I left academia and that job, I didn't leave my love for books. And so I would constantly be reading anyway, as if I still had a syllabus to prepare. And then I would share them on my Facebook. At the time, I wasn't even on Instagram. And I would just joke about, oh, here's a book auntie again. And one day I referred to myself as the Desi book auntie, and the brilliant author of Sayantani Das Gupta said she loved that. She loved it. She confirming that she loved that phrasing was the motivation for me to start referring to myself that way. And then eventually I started the Instagram handle.
Is reading a lifelong hobby for you?
For a long time, I stopped reading, huh? So it's kind of a long story, but for a long time, I had, maybe a mild brain injury of some sort, or just maybe overwhelm from having been in academia and having had to do reading all day, every day for like a decade in the pursuit of my PhD and writing of my dissertation. So for a while, I stopped reading. I couldn't even read 10 sentences without my brain hurting. And so, really, coming back to reading as a love and a passion is just a part of my healing journey. It's like the more I'm attracted to books and I'm reading, the more I'm remembering that I used to not read anymore because my brain and my spirit were just tired, especially because I was reading a lot of content that was required, right? Like to prove that you are a knowledgeable person who's a Dr. Sethi, you have to read a lot of, white male authors. And they really I just couldn't do it. Like my brain, literally, I would open a book and I'd be like, ugh. So to come to this, where I'm just surrounded by South Asian and brown and black authors and their books, and I just feel so much joy in those books that I share about. Trust me, if I don't love them, I don't share about them.
And if you find a book right now that you don't really like, would you still finish it?
No, why waste your time? And thankfully, there's just a whole like abundance of books available out there that are worth your time. So maybe focus on those, and really, usually in the first 3 or 4 chapters, if it hasn't captured my imagination or if it's given me red flags, then I stop reading it.
What's your favorite genre to read?
Nonfiction written by brown and black authors that's very specifically addressing anti-racism, social justice, and lately I'm really trying to learn about abolition. So anything written by Black feminists and is nonfiction and very applicable to sort of the trying times that we're going through really captures my attention. It's almost like a daily meditation practice.
Is there an author that you really like these days?
A lot of them. The people that I look to for guidance, like in terms of like what are they saying today that might be relevant, tend to be, as I described, the Black feminists. And so I pick up bell hooks and anything she writes regularly just for grounding and for perspective, right? So like let's say this week I needed some perspective around, the situation in India that is a global issue. And then I also needed a perspective on anti-black violence in the US. And so who would I go to who might have said something that was relevant that will help me figure out my place in this? And usually it's Bell Hooks, and she's still a living legend, so to speak. So, and someone who's passed away, whose words I often rely on to give me that same, is Audre Lorde, who's a poet and an essayist. And pretty much anything and everything she says or writes will often give me that, like, if I need a mind shift, if I need to figure out a new perspective on something. So those are two people I really rely on a lot, and cite a lot and teach a lot.
You have written a book now. Did you always want to be an author?
Yes and no. Listen, all my life, people did say to me, in a very dismissive way, especially our Desi kin, write a book. And usually it's kind of like, stop. And, it's dismissive, right? And so I never really embraced that idea. And then I did write a book, right? I spent 10 years getting my brain very tired of reading and writing, and it's called a dissertation, but it's just collecting dust somewhere in some academic library. But I never published it, right? So if you mean write a book to be published, that's a more recent aspiration that's going to come to fruition. And it's been about 4 years in the making. I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago that I realized that what I had to say, there were people who wanted to hear it.
And what's it like to be a writer? Do you follow a routine? Do you have a very creative, moody process? How's it for you?
Each writer has a different answer for that. For me, it is, I have a very full life of commitments. I have teenage children. Writing comes to me every now and again. And when it does, I actually wrote the first drafts of elements of my book on my phone in sending myself emails. So, like, I would be sitting there multitasking. Simultaneously, a thought would come to me and I would write myself an email on my phone. And so that's how I do, is that I don't wait for the right mood and the right time and the right ritual, because my life isn't designed that way. So whenever it comes to me, I just do it. The first thought is just capturing that thought, especially because I write in semi-verse. So almost like, our ancestral practices were like boliyan, right? So very often it's something that I'm processing emotionally, and I have to write it down in order to emotionally process it. So the first draft is usually either a note to myself. I do make sure that I have time later to come back to it, which is why I will say that the current book, and by the way, I'm going to show it to you since you asked, it's like printed out, like we're doing the copy edits.
Hmm.
So like for it to look like this has taken 4 years.
And did you face writer block during these 4 years?
I don't believe in such a thing. And I'll tell you why. What we call writer's block is actually something else. I believe that there's usually something underneath the writer's block, right? So is it that we really care a lot about what other people will think about what we have to write? Is it that we don't really believe that what we have to say is valuable? What's blocking you? And usually it's a mental or emotional block. So the times in my life that I did experience the writer's block was when I was dissertating, and it took me a long time. And the first at least 3 drafts of my dissertation were rejected by my professors and advisors. And it was so painful each time because I had spent so much time in writer's block. Like literally I would sit at my computer and 2 hours would go by. No, really. And I had like not even managed 2 sentences, and I was so hard on myself. And I think the block was because it had to look a certain way and sound a certain way. And I was blocked from writing it that way. So when I did the deep healing work that allowed me to start reading again, I also realized there's no such thing as writer's block. My decolonial resistance to it is a clapback and is kind of really challenging. Who is it that's blocking us? What are the systems blocking us? What are the internal blocks? Because very often it's not just our own emotions, but it's because the systems are designed to block you and me from writing. I think we have to really interrogate what's a writer's block and what's a different kind of a block.
My next question is, if you were to be deserted on an island,
Oh,
which 3 books would you take with you?
I would probably take the hidden words, which come from the Baha'i writings, and they're almost written like poetry. They were originally written in Persian and Arabic, and so my family is of both Hindus, and then I have Sikh ancestors. But my father and I, we practice the Baha'i faith, and so it's like a holy text within, but it's written very much like personal guidance and like advice for living. So I would definitely bring the hidden words with me, because it would keep me sort of like spiritually nourished. And then I would probably bring one of the ones I mentioned before, like maybe, the collected writings of Audre Lorde. And then I think the third book would probably be, I could probably bring one of the ones from the stack over here that I'm currently reading, like, like one of those as well. Something that's like radically hopeful, right? Something that makes you want to like continue while you're stranded, to hope that you won't be stranded, right? Something like that.
Yeah, definitely you need hope. And in the end, if you were to pick one interesting life experience to share with us, what would you tell us today?
I think lately I've been thinking a lot about going to visit India with my children and my life partner. And we spent a whole month there, and I pulled them from school that year, and we were homeschooling, and we spent a whole month in India. And I think it was really moving, because prior to that, it had been more than 2 decades that I hadn't gone back. Because if I ever got on a long plane, I would go to Botswana to see my mom and dad and my brother. But that was a long overdue kind of reconciling to with kind of places that I had been disconnected from. And so I would spend a lot of time telling you about how meaningful that was, and that, reconnecting with relatives, but also seeing India through the eyes of a midlife person, you know, because a lot of my trauma memories of India were as a young woman, and I couldn't do anything without my male cousins coming with me. I didn't have mobility. I didn't have freedom. I didn't have a lot of ways to function, because I felt so restricted. And so going as a midlife person who had money of her own, and who is, kind of like a mom of grown children, there was a different experience altogether. And I just was so thankful for that. I was so thankful that we had saved up time and money to do that. And I am grateful that I have that memory bank to draw upon.
Well, thank you, Gayatri, for answering my 11 questions. And now we get to talk about your book, Unbelonging.